this, man. He's like a butterfly flapping his wings deep down in the forest, man. It's gonna cause a tree fall like 5,000 miles away, man. There ain't nobody seeing nobody. Man, it seems like you don't even know, man. It's like you're born into this world, man. And you got like that, man. The dust and wind, man. Or like the dang old candle, man. It don't matter, man. It's like these old times.
All right, Ernst Van Ziel, welcome to the Jay Burden Show. How are you doing?
Thanks for having me back on, Jay. I'm doing fine. It's there's a little bit of a cold front rolling in here in the capital city of Pretoria, but otherwise things are looking great. Things are on the move. Things are happening. It's been a fantastic and absolutely fascinating and also exciting year here in South Africa, and I'm in the US. I've been keeping an eye on your politics, and it seems like your 2025 has not been something to sniff at either. But yeah, it feels like we've already had a year's worth of content and happenings and developments in the first 8 months, but I'm not complaining.
Yeah, I recently recorded an episode. I guess it's out today as of when we're recording this, with John D., who's a figure in the kind of academic agent sphere who I'm friendly with. I like him a lot. And one of the things we were talking about is it feels as if 2025 is the year of narrative death, right? We're seeing these different belief systems really sort of fall apart. I mean, even down to MAGA itself, right, is sort of coming to an end. And there's a weird degree to which that is happening, at least on, from the outside looking in, to your country as well. Right, South Africa has hit American news in a way that it hasn't in 30 years. Positions which were fairly niche, which were really only issues that people like me who were kind of on the political fringes were aware of or cared about, have been put on the center stage. And so I brought you on to talk about the sort of diplomatic crisis between my country and yours, particularly as regards tariffs. So, Trump is a protectionist. He's been big on tariffs. And we're not going to dig into the economics of that. I'm not knowledgeable enough to do so. But it has created a sort of localized crisis in your nation, right? They're looking for someone to blame. And this is sort of exacerbated by, shall we say, an aggressive stance from our State Department to your nation over effectively discrimination against Boers, right? Farm murders and stuff like that. And so if you could, do you want to kind of summarize that, right? The initial break, and then talk about how that affected these economic negotiations?
Sure. So, you're right to call it a diplomatic crisis. It really is not hyperbolic to call it that. And this whole diplomatic storm also started around the 2nd of February. And it all started with something that seemed maybe trivial if you just mention it outside of the context. And that trivial thing was a Truth Social post by none other than your president, Mr. Trump. And I'm not going to read the whole post, but that was the initial one that I think has become infamous to some extent. People know exactly what I'm talking about when I reference the very bad things happening in South Africa, because that's all that he said within that first post. There are very bad things happening in South Africa. People are being targeted. Certain people are being targeted in South Africa. And he's going more, the implication was more was to follow. And more did follow. So it was followed up by an executive order that was signed by Donald Trump. And again, if your audience are not familiar with this executive order, I do recommend that they go read it if they are genuinely interested in this topic of the South Africa-USA diplomatic rift. It is quite illuminating for many reasons, but I'll sum up some of the main reasons why. So firstly, this executive order, why it's significant, is it names the Afrikaners as an ethnic group, as a cultural community explicitly. And it does so in a positive sense, in the sense of it's not attacking Afrikaners or condemning Afrikaners or framing them in a negative light. And me and my colleagues at Afriforum went to look through history, and we could not find a single instance where this has happened ever. The Afrikaners have never been acknowledged in a positive sense by a sitting US president. they've only been acknowledged in a negative sense. That's been the norm up until 2025. So that acknowledgement alone, even though abstract as it may be, is probably one of the most positive things to come out of this whole episode, this whole chapter in relations between South Africa and the United States. And like I said, you have to think a little bit abstractly to see why. But the fact that Afrikaners are being acknowledged as an identity, as a group of people, and they're not being attacked for the first time in our history as a people, that's quite significant, coming from the most powerful man in the world. And another aspect of this, sure, go ahead.
Just if I can briefly interject, I think part of that is oftentimes you and I are talking about cultural identity. And there's a degree to which that is internal, right? We decide we are a group. But there's also an external part of that. Others recognize you as a group. And we can say it's probably fairly clear that there's a little bit of politics going on here, right? If this were a non-controversial group, it would not be difficult for international bodies to recognize them as a specific group with specific interests, right? If you guys looked a little bit different, we probably would have done this 70 years ago. But that cannot be overstated how important that is, right? That adds an air of legitimacy to it. And in addition, right, we see a somewhat similar battle waged over the recognition of Palestine, for example, right? Once you are recognized as a nation or a people, there is a sort of like spiritual or psychic legitimacy, but also a legal one as well. And I'm not looking to make that comparison, too tightly, right? There's obviously major differences, but to your point, that is a major shift, right? From simply being at best a sort of like hated minority group, sort of loosely organized, to a specific recognized people. But sorry, I'll throw it back to you, Ernst.
Right. No, it's such an important point. That's why I'm glad that you underscore it, because the fact is, there's a reason why, and no matter which side you fall on that, on the conflict in regards to what's happening between Israel and Gaza, the fact that that whole question regarding acknowledgement of an identity is such a hot button issue. The fact that it is such a hotly debated issue proves how important that type of acknowledgement is. And the other thing that formed parts of this executive order that also was earth-shattering, not just in South Africa, but also for the whole narrative around South Africa for the past 30 years, was that executive order enabled for Afrikaners specifically to apply for refugee status in the United States, which has many, many implications attached to it. The fact that the United States says this group of people specifically can apply for refugee status in the USA has the inignorable issue, or the inignorable implication, that there is something is wrong. There's some reason why these people are being given the opportunity to apply for refugee status. And that relates to the very bad things happening in South Africa, the targeting of certain groups in South Africa. So that's kind of, and then also there was a freezing of aid to South Africa. But why I don't rate that as highly an impact is the fact that USA doesn't exist anymore. So that was kind of something that was already going to happen. And as we move into farther and farther into 2025, the cutting off of aid becomes less and less significant in regards to the bigger picture, the bigger context. It's kind of the norm, what was happening all across the world. So that's the executive order.
I don't know how you can be so cavalier about this. I've been reliably assumed that hundreds of millions of people will be dying from AIDS. I mean, I think already, right? I'm slightly joking there. The hyperbole that surrounded that decision to cut off aid is impossible to overstate, right? You would think that, a meteorite was heading towards Earth, the way people reacted. Right. So if you could you describe to what degree South Africa does depend on aid, and what does that look like on the ground? Right? Are we, bringing in trucks of food, or, what does it mean for sort of the average man on the street?
So I haven't done a deep dive into exactly all the different avenues along which this aid was being distributed in South Africa, but chiefly it was being done in programs like, for example, support to anti-HIV programs, other medical programs and medicine-based programs. And then also a lot of it was going towards NGOs in South Africa that do various things, from poverty alleviation to community upliftment, whatever goal you want to attach to them. But something else that's that has come to the fore, really, in South African discourse particularly, is the fact that more and more the government is talking about how important it is that we, South Africa, is a sovereign country. Our sovereignty is very important. We will not be bullied. We are a sovereign country, and our sovereignty needs to be protected. But at the same time, if you are constantly begging the entire world for handouts, if you are welcoming this form of aid to as large an extent as possible, then you are, by definition, losing some of your sovereignty, because you are then, when that aid is then cut off, put in the position, as South Africa is now, where a lot of these programs that were funded by US aid now either have to be funded in-house somehow, or they stop existing. And a lot of them, not all of them, are vague, or you have no idea what they are doing with the money. A lot of them are just basic poverty upliftment programs. Now, how successful those programs are, I haven't evaluated them all. But I assume a lot of them have had some positive results. So it's better to have those programs than not. But at the same time, the question is, if your sovereignty as a country is so important to you, so dearly important to you, then why hasn't your priority as a government been for the past 30 years to wean yourself off as much of that support as possible, as much of that aid as possible? I understand countries that are in the middle of a civil war, or countries that are incredibly destabilized through just internal conflict, are in a different situation in regards to their relationship to US aid. But in South Africa has a lot of problems. It has a lot of serious problems. But in comparison to many other African countries, we do have the capacity to have weaned ourselves off of this type of aid from the US. So there's this tension that's come to the fore as well in regards to that aid being cut off. But I mean, that's to sum it up. That's where the whole thing started. That's the beginning of 2025. And immediately the narrative already started then. Well, now there are organizations that point out problems in South Africa, especially where the government is implementing destructive or discriminatory policies. Organizations like Afriforum and organizations like Afriforum that have pointed this out to a US audience. Therefore, the South African government seized on the opportunity to then start framing our organization as the scapegoats. That's long before they started framing us for the tariffs as well. It already started with the cutoff of aid. That was already Afriforum's fault, even though Afriforum has never asked for aid to be cut off to South Africa. That's a US matter. Whether South Africa should be receiving aid or not, you as American taxpayers should be deciding that. That's not for Afriforum to decide.
Yeah, so there are several things there. I think the question of sovereignty is quite an interesting one. Particularly when you look at the sort of anti-colonial nature of your government, right? I realize that particularly for American conservatives, they don't like talking about, the American empire, but it is an empire. And the loss of sovereignty from, Europe to where you live it's fairly significant, right? In some instances, right, it is foreign policy. Are you as a country allowed to decide who to go to war with and who to support? I mean, we've seen the answer to that. The answer is no, right? But again, it's sort of similar to, your friend with rich parents, right? Who's technically independent, but they're paying for his house. It's like, well, okay, you're not really independent, are you? Right? You may have a job, but, you don't have the same concerns that a real adult, if we can use that, or a real country in the example of South Africa would, where they have to, pay for the things that they do. And look, I think we spoke last time about this sort of, the tensions of being an advocate for your people, right? At a certain point, it comes at the expense of others. But again, if you are a government, you would assume you would want to be as sovereign as possible, right? Just selfishly would want to be the most in charge that you could. And, the way in which many of these sort of states at the periphery of our empire where it's on one hand, they very much like to posture as these anti-colonial revolutionaries, but on the other hand, they're like, oh, wait, but don't take away the money. It's sort of comedic. And I'm glad you brought up the degree to which you and your organization have been used as a scapegoat, because it does very much seem like you and your people operate as your government's whipping boy, where whenever something is going wrong, we'll figure out a reason that's their fault, right? And blame them and sort of do the math.
It's like
afterwards.
that old. I remember the internet atheists always like to use the fallacy of the God of the gaps. Oh, these Christians, they always explain everything with the God of the gaps. If they can't explain something, it's God that did it. Well, what you're describing there is the Boers of the gaps. So every time there's something bad that happens to South Africa, then it's the Boers' fault that that thing has happened. So that's their own little type of ethnic fallacy that they have, or ethnicity-based fallacy.
Yeah, and so obviously we've spoken about the initial parts, but if I'm correct, the South African diplomat has not spoken to American sources in over a month now, if I'm not mistaken. Did we remove your diplomat, or am I misremembering that?
No, there's actually a lot of just bizarre things that happen on the diplomatic side, in particular in regards to the diplomats. So, and we have to rewind a bit in regards to get to the first incident. So that was all the way back in March. This whole crisis started in February, and then in March, Marco Rubio revealed that South Africa's ambassador to the United States, Ibrahim Rasool, was, in his words, no longer welcome in the United States after he made comments smearing President Donald Trump and his supporters as racists and white supremacists. And this is not like it's old footage that's being rediscovered or dug up to be used against him. He's making these comments as the ambassador of South Africa to the United States, calling the president of his host country a white supremacist, and the half of the population is racist as well. So, and then Marco Rubio goes on to also say that Ibrahim Rasool, the South African ambassador, is a race-baiting politician who hates America and hates the president of the United States. We have nothing to discuss with him, and so he is considered persona non grata. So Mr. Rasool was given his marching orders in March, told to leave the country, and he left the United States. And since then, we have not had a South African ambassador to the United States. So he was replaced by Msibi Jonas, who is not an ambassador, but he is the special envoy to the United States. So that's something you'll notice about specifically a lot of these liberation movement governments in Africa, is they like to create these very official and amazing sounding positions that don't really can never live up to their title. So this guy is the special envoy to the United States, Msibi Jonas. However, he then is also engulfed in scandal when it is reported that the U.S. government denied his visa and rejected his credentials. So this guy is appointed as the middleman between South Africa and the United States. Remember, we don't have an ambassador in the United States at this point, and he gets his visa rejected and his credentials rejected, and he's sitting at home up until this day. So for the past 3 to 4 months, South Africa has effectively been without a diplomatic representative in Washington, D.C. during one of the worst, and this is not, again, there's no other diplomatic crisis that comes to mind. So this is during the worst diplomatic crisis since 1994 in South Africa. And we don't have a diplomatic representative in Washington, D.C. And now that's all been revealed, and the fact that his visa was rejected is not something that happened yesterday. It happened at the very start when he was appointed, and it was reported that allegedly the South African government was aware of this, and they just kept pushing this guy. And the Americans kept telling the South African government, no, we don't recognize this guy's credentials. We're not going to accept his visa. So yeah, that's where we also stand on the diplomatic front in regards to diplomats. Our diplomats are persona non grata in the United States, or they're sitting at home earning a hefty government paycheck to do maybe at best Zoom meetings with their American counterparts.
Yeah, it is sort of comedic. Right. I mean, there are a few things as reliable in American politics as Donald Trump's pettiness, right? His willingness to hold a grudge. But in cases like this, one, not only can I not blame him, but two, it's if we were being fair, we would have thrown out your ambassador decades ago, right? If we held your country
but also
to the
on
same
that
standards.
point, let's say if you are aware that you are dealing with a president like Donald Trump that does not take these types of insults lightly, then you do not appoint someone that has a record of insulting that particular figure.
Yes. I mean, it's even down to the point of if I were just a normal person going to your country, I would not insult the country or the leader of it, right? It's just stupid. It's rude, let alone as an official representative from one nation to the other. I mean, I realize this is far from your government's most egregious misstep, but it is just sort of, I mean, it's sort of amateurish, right? It's like kids playing pretend government. So,
because just some details there that I left out that I think is important. Why I say you don't appoint someone that's attacked the president is that shortly after our president appointed Mr. Jonas as the special envoy to the United States, it was revealed that Mr. Jonas has called Donald Trump a racist and a narcissist. So that's, I mean, this is, you can't tell me that the ANC was just completely unaware that this guy has made these types of inflammatory comments about the president of the host nation he's supposed to be visiting. So that's just another piece of important detail there before we move on.
So sure. And obviously the fact that there are no official channels open, right, at least in the normal sense between our two nations, has made this sort of new tariff regime difficult, right? I believe Trump announced reciprocal tariffs roughly 6 weeks ago, plus or minus. The details of the scheme sort of varied, but effectively it was, a tit for tat, right? If you tariff our goods, we'll tariff yours.
Yeah, but we've known about these tariffs. Well, the whole world is known for 90 days. So 90 days ago was when you had that initial big tariff, not Independence Day, what was it called? The
Liberation Day or
Liberation
something
Day,
grand.
Yeah, when the tariffs were announced. And then there was a 90-day pause. So all these nations then had 90 days, 3 months basically, to come to the negotiating table. And many did very effectively.
Well, and that's the thing about it, right, is that, pretty quickly, even MAGA hardliners were sort of disturbed by how quickly nations were able to figure out a deal, right? Obviously, I'm not, the most radical protectionist. I've sort of limited opinions on economics altogether, but it was very clear that this was something that could be done, right? It seemed even relatively small nations, right, Vietnam and others, were able to come to the negotiating table. Now, obviously, that was sort of dependent on having, an ambassador to do the negotiations in the first place. And so it seems as if, and I haven't followed this as closely, South Africa has not been able to come up with a deal. Is that correct?
No. We used the 90 days. The South African government used those 90 days to do an ostrich strategy of just pushing their head into the ground and pretending like the problem doesn't exist and hoping it goes away. And then using the energy that they have left to attack and smear their domestic critics rather than work towards a solution. And the fact is, and this is where it gets really it gets difficult not to see this as a deliberate sabotage of relations between South Africa and the United States, because the United States gave preconditions to normalizing or fixing relations with South Africa. So we can get into the delegations that went there as well, non-governmental delegations of organization Afriforum and the Labor Union Solidarity Center delegation there to meet in the White House and many other representatives there. There were other delegations that went as well. And all these delegations heard the same thing back from the Americans, from the Trump administration. There are 4 preconditions on the table to fix relations between South Africa and facilitate a trade deal. Number 1, classify farm attacks as a priority crime, which means it's a unique crime that deserves a unique counter strategy. Doesn't mean it becomes the priority of the entire government or of police. It just becomes it gets a unique counter strategy. And other priority crimes with capitalized letters, it's actual classification include cash and transit heists, rhino poaching, political assassinations, gender-based violence, gang violence. These are all crimes that are given priority crime status, and they are dealt with in that way. Secondly, the second precondition is publicly and unequivocally and unreservedly condemn the kill the Boer, kill the farmer chant. Third, pledge that no land expropriation without fair market compensation will take place. And then fourthly, exempt US entities from all racially discriminatory policies. Those four preconditions, straight from the Trump administration, were told to each one of these delegations that went there, and probably also told to the South African government, but because I can't really say that for 100% certainty, because the South African government is pretending like the Americans haven't told them anything. So, but I can't think how I know these things were told to these delegations, because all these delegations made it public. They said, well, this is what the Americans, the Trump administration told us. So there's two options on the table. What's happening here? Either all four or five, all these delegations that have gone, non-governmental delegations, either they're lying, or secondly, the South African government does know about these preconditions being laid out, and they're just not going to address them. I think option two is the case, that they know that these are the preconditions that the United States has given them, and they're just not willing to budge on any of them, because the South African government's official line in regards to this crisis has been, we will not be bullied, which means that almost baked into the cake there is, we will not compromise on anything. And at the very heart, at the foundation of a deal, when you're talking to the guy who wrote The Art of the Deal, you should know at the very heart of a deal is a compromise. Both parties compromise to get to a certain point where both can make a deal. But if your line, your literal verbatim line from your government is, we will not be bullied, end quote, then you're already telling the Americans, well, we're not going to budge on anything. We're not going to compromise on anything. Well, then there's no basis for a deal. And then are you really surprised that after 90 days, your government or the South African government has not reached a deal, and they're just basically blaming their own domestic critics for their failure?
And several things there, right? Those demands are not unreasonable.
No.
It's not like that we're asking for the moon. And again, the fact that they're pretending that they've heard nothing. Look, Ernst, I don't want to be rude to you, but I imagine you don't have the same resources that the entire government of South Africa does.
No.
And if you know about this, if I can find it out on Google in, 15, 20 seconds, the idea that they don't know is laughable, right? The idea that they've not been made aware is absurd.
What they mean is they've not heard preconditions that they're willing to accept. That's what you read between the lines.
Exactly. And again, right, the idea of, being unwilling to compromise even on really very, honestly, fairly mild. Because look, we've seen this in America. You can categorize a crime as whatever you want relatively easily. You don't have to enforce the law on that, right? We've seen that any number of times. The other stuff, again, it's right. And I hate to say this because I wish they would be enforced the strictest way possible, but it is entirely within the scope of possibility to say, yeah, sure, whatever, and then sort of carry on with business as usual, right? This isn't a hard problem to solve if you are someone who wants to do those things. But again, it's this sort of like, I don't want to say stunning incompetence, because I've been watching South African politics sort of passively for 5 years now. I shouldn't be shocked by it. And yet somehow at every time where you think, surely they can't get dumber, they double down and they're like, oh, you thought that was bad, watch this.
Right.
And so to sort of, oh, sorry, you can react to that if you want.
No, I just wanted to say it gets to a point where, like I said, maybe incompetence is the charitable interpretation. Maybe there is actually a willing attempt here from the South African government, from the ANC specifically, to sabotage and blow up the relationship with the United States, which they ideologically have every reason to do. Materially, trade-wise, Economics wise, there's no reason for them to do it, but ideologically, they have every reason to do it. They've been itching to realign themselves with the BRICS nations. That's also a topic, a separate topic, because I think a lot of BRICS bros online will think, well, why don't they just realign with China and Russia, and then everything is fine? Leave the United States in the dust. Well, it's not that simple, because the United States, well, firstly, the United States is a major trading partner with South Africa, and the other BRICS nations have not seemed all too excited to step in to help South Africa during this diplomatic crisis. They've been quite absent and silent throughout this entire ordeal, almost like, yeah, you're on your own here, guys. We can't fix this mess for you. And I think that's something a lot of people underestimate. To globally realign yourself trade-wise is not something you do overnight. This, as I keep repeating, this is not an RTS game. This is not you just click another research tree and then you realign yourself trade-wise with a different block. That's not how it works. And this, incompetent as they might be, the South African government knows that, I think, very, very intimately, that they can't just overnight realign themselves trade-wise. They can ideologically align themselves as much as they want with BRICS, but the material conditions in South Africa, the actual reality on the ground, is much more stubborn to change.
So let's pivot to the next stage of this, right? Which is effectively the ANC blaming you and yours. So if you could, I mean, what is their argument? Is it simply they are making the world aware of problems? If the world wasn't aware of problems, they wouldn't be upset at us. So it's really your fault for showing everyone what we did that was wrong. Is that effectively their argument?
Their argument is summed up in one word, their favorite word this year, and that is misinformation. So, I mean, this is a word you as an American know very intimately. You've been subject to the misinformation boogeyman for a long time as well. Well, the ANC have learned that you can just, almost like a magical spell, you can just use this word and then your opponents are discredited and they silence them and everything is fine. But that's what they've tried for the majority of this crisis. They've tried to write it off as just misinformation. There's just organizations within and individuals from South Africa that are spreading lies about this all beautiful country. They're trying to sabotage South Africa, and it's all based on just nothing concrete. It's all just misinformation. And the implication there is, and this is maybe self-delusion on their part, is if it's just based on misinformation, then this whole thing, and this seems to be how many within the ANC view it, this whole diplomatic crisis is just based on one big fat misunderstanding. It's all just one. There's a third force. There's a conspiracy to blemish South Africa, to make South Africa out as this dysfunctional place and to make the government out as evil or discriminatory, while everything is actually fine. And we just need to bring the facts to the Americans, and then they'll see that it's all, they'll see the light. Well, it hasn't worked. There's a fantastic piece by a South African investigative journalist called Marie-Louise Antoni. She wrote it on the platform called Politics Web. The title is The Information War Against Afriforum. And it details how you can actually see in real time at the beginning of this crisis how the mechanisms and gears behind the scenes were turning to try to turn the narrative against Afriforum, to basically frame us as the scapegoat for this whole situation. And it culminates in real world consequences. It's not just a game of semantics or trying to hurt Afriforum in regards to Afriforum's brand or how people view the organization. The South African police earlier this year, a special investigative unit, actually the Hawks, that investigates organized crime, confirmed that a high treason investigation has been opened against Afriforum. So there's a very high chance that this interview being published is going to go into the docket as well. I just want to wave there to whoever is watching. That's the reality. I mean, I can joke about it all I want. It's real world consequences. It's a real world political game that's being played by the ANC, where they are basically trying to intimidate Afriforum as an organization by supporting this investigation and giving this investigation legitimacy as a ruling party. But I mean, at the same time, it helps Afriforum to the extent that it shows everyone that we are the real deal. If we were just controlled opposition or some paper tiger, then the state would not go out of its way to target us in this manner. So at least on that front, it gives us a lot of legitimacy.
So several things there. One, it is always kind of funny to see the proliferation of these like memes, these ideas, right? Because at least in the American context, there's sort of this, and this is an infographic that if you've been on the internet, you've seen, right? With sort of Venn diagrams charting the difference between, disinformation, misinformation, and malinformation, right? Which have different degrees of, intent and whatever. The point is, it's genuine liberal gobbledygook. Because what it basically means is if you disagree,
I'm old-fashioned. I just call people liars.
Yeah, exactly, right? Or from like the eternal perspective, what it basically is if you disagree with me, if you have a different opinion, well, there's something wrong with you, right? This isn't simply, you lying or you having a different opinion. You are a victim of this sort of nebulous concept, right? The information of the gaps, right? To go back to your analogy earlier. And it's particularly comedic in the instance of your government, because the misinformation, quote unquote, I mean, it's not like you're really distorting anything, right? You're just reporting what exactly has happened. And it's so clumsy, right? It's such a naked grab where it seems effectively, again, like this sort of whatever is to hand we will use to beat Afriforum and beat the boards. And to your point about being seen as, sort of controlled opposition, this is something I've noticed as well with organizations I am a part of, that, as a dissident, there is sort of a legitimacy in persecution, right? The state actually doesn't like you. And that's obviously, I much prefer that your organization wasn't being investigated for high treason, which is, again, going back to the special envoy, seems to be slightly grandiose and over the top for what's going on here, right? It's not like you're, smuggling nuclear secrets, although the idea of smuggling nuclear secrets from South Africa to America is kind of just inherently comedic as well, right? Given the history of that. But point is, right, it's, again, it's not shocking, but the sort of childishness of this, where it's, we don't like you, so you're committing treason. Because we decided to simply not address an issue for 90 days. And now we're mad and looking for someone to blame. I mean, it is very much just sort of like naked politics, right? There's not much else to it. So you mentioned that sort of organized crime investigation into high treason. Can you provide a little bit of context as to, what that crime is per se? Like, are people often committed of it? Or convicted of it, rather?
Of high treason? No, I can't remember the last person that was convicted of high treason in South Africa, but the unit that does that investigation is an investigation unit, the Hawks, that deals with investigations, particularly into organized crime. So, the irony just doesn't stop. I mean, in South Africa, one of the organized crime hotbeds in South Africa that goes organized crime that is involved with any heinous crime you can imagine, as depraved as you can imagine, from child trafficking to just organized murder and organized torture of people. That's the same investigative unit that's investigating those organizations, those organized crime organizations, is also now investigating a civil rights organization in South Africa that dared go to the United States and tell them our government has over 142 race laws on the books, race-based laws, many of which are explicitly discriminatory, even against children. The South African government is refusing to address this issue of farm murders. It is refusing to condemn those that romanticize the attacks on farmers and murdering farmers. It's not taking a stance against chants like kill the boer, kill the farmer. And it is a government that's threatening its citizens, particularly its white citizens, with the expropriation, the confiscation of their property without compensation. And then when people tell you, well, they don't really mean expropriation of property in the Zimbabwean case. No, they mean expropriation of property like in Zimbabwe, because this is a ruling party that still idolizes Robert Mugabe and ZANU-PF of Zimbabwe as heroes. So you can't tell me that these guys, if for example, if someone in your country idealizes a regime that is famous, infamous for a certain policy direction, and then they sign an act into law that is named after that particular policy direction, expropriation without compensation, you can't tell that person then, no, well, this time they're just kidding. It has nothing to do with that policy direction. I mean,
like if you could imagine a hypothetical, and we're very, very far from that, right? As kind of shown by recent things. But if the Republican Party, signed the Austrian Painter Act,
right,
restricting, synagogues and Jewish involvement in certain businesses,
and they also major Republican figures like J.D. Vance hail this leader as an icon of the revolution, as someone that they aspire towards.
Right. It would be painfully obvious. Right. Again, it's like, and I don't want to keep coming back to this just for purely punitive reasons, but painting that leap in logic of saying, wait a minute, you signed the Robert Mugabe Act named after something he did. You all talk about how much you like him. Painting that as disinformation, right? As if you've got your strings out, talking about the Illuminati, putting fluoride in the water.
This happened. This actually happened. I was on an interview, and it was a panel discussion. And as part of the panel discussion, they asked, and now this was already the whole diplomatic crisis is already at a fever pitch. And then that topic comes up, and I say, well, what's treasonous and misinformation about telling the United States that our government is threatening its citizens with expropriating their property without compensation? And the one panelist, a professor at a university, says, well, what do you mean that the government says that? And I say, well, there's two examples. Here, 2 years ago, the president of South Africa said that the aim of this bill, this act, is to enable expropriation without compensation. And here's the deputy president saying the same thing. And then the academics' answer to me was, well, they don't mean it. They just say that to rile up their supporters. They're just being populist. They don't really mean it. So if I told that same academic, Donald Trump said that he's going to execute all illegal immigrants, is that same academic then going to say, oh, well, he probably just says that to his supporters? No, that academic's going to be like, we have to put a stop to this. There's an imminent danger.
Well, of course. And it's you see, and this is why, I'm glad you brought up the sort of new atheist era. But I think one of the reasons that the culture around sort of debate culturally, whether it was, Christians versus atheists or anything else, has really fallen apart, is it has become so painfully obvious that these debates do not matter, because politics has degenerated to the point where it is literally, well, he didn't say expropriations without compensation, but, Trump was celebrating neo-Nazis after Charlottesville, right? It is so clearly just that like Schmittian friend enemy. And, for my friends, anything, for my enemies, nothing, that it's like, well, why are we having a conversation at this point, right? This is on so far down the kind of like, as you would say, the kind of like pyramid of enmity, that at this point there is no sort of like concord to be made, right? There's really no discussion anymore. And, yeah, I caught a little bit of that. I think you were posting on social media clips from that show a while back. And I was incredibly infuriated on your behalf. It was the most frustrating interview to watch. Not because you handled yourself poorly, but far from it. But just because, again, it was almost pointless. It was like, well, what is the point of having a discussion with someone who says something like that? It is, like you said, an ostrich sticking its head in the sand. Right, this is not a real conversation anymore. So when we look at the sort of public opinion in South Africa, what is the public opinion of these tariffs? Are they
Mm.
blaming you? Are they blaming us? Are they blaming their own government? How do people see that issue?
Right. So, as with all perceptions in South Africa, there's the elite perception and the regular guy on the streets perception about what's going on. I didn't do a 60 million population poll to tell you what the average South African thinks. I can only tell you anecdotally what I've experienced, because I get to deal with normal South Africans every day of my life. My job necessitates it. So I can really only tell you what the normal South Africans that I've encountered of all backgrounds have told me and what I've picked up from their views. I also use as a litmus test, you just listen to some of the callers that call in on radio stations in South Africa, and you hear, well, this is just a normal person calling and giving their perception. And there's a varied amount of ideas out there in regards to who's actually to blame for these tariffs. But overall, from what I can pick up, the average South African is not blaming Afriforum. The average South African is blaming an incompetent government, not because they hate the ANC, because they've been subjected to chronic ANC failure for 30 years. So when the government that can't keep the lights on, when the government that through malpractice has dozens of mentally ill patients in state care die of malnutrition and not being fed, when that same government that shoots mine workers that are are protesting dead, when that same government tells them, no, that those Boers, they're the real bad guys, they're behind this crisis, at some point that just doesn't work anymore. But the elite in South Africa, the comment class, as I call them, I mean, they have a completely different view on this crisis. They are all in lockstep blaming Afriforum and Africa and minorities in general, the white minority in general in South Africa, for the crisis, because that's just how they roll. But I mean, this really came to the fore before firstly, it came to the fore when Donald Trump made his initial post about very bad things happening in South Africa. What then ensued was the top 1% of income earners in South Africa, the richest of the rich, both black and white, rushed to social media to post videos of themselves lounging next to their luxurious pools or walking around in their palace houses, all in very high security estates, making videos of themselves mockingly and sarcastically saying, look at the bad things happening in South Africa, showing themselves their cartoonishly luxurious lives. And I just thought to myself, I mean, you really think this is resonating with the average guy on the street? You really think it reminded me of Conan O'Brien from Your Country going to Haiti and posting a photograph of, does this look like a shithole country to you? Haiti was never, doesn't have to be made great again. It was always great. And that the same happened with the elites in South Africa. They rushed to social media to use their cartoonishly luxurious lives as counterproof to Donald Trump saying bad things are happening in South Africa.
Oh, you brought up exactly the example I was thinking of, right? Well, it's very nice on my resort. So what are you saying about this country? Right? It is
one journalist posted a photograph of her view from her house that is a beautiful mountain view with the caption, bad things are happening in South Africa.
Well, it's like, I mean, even the most, yes, kind of black-pilled take on South Africa, even those people don't say that the country's not beautiful. Right. It's absurd. The idea that, well, here's something pretty, so something bad can't be happening elsewhere.
No, or I'm able to drink a mojito next to my Olympic-sized swimming pool, therefore everything is fine.
Well, I'm sure there's a couple very pretty views in Cambodia, but it doesn't make the Khmer Rouge any less pleasant. But
I mean, it's an example that's been done to death, but it is literally just the let them eat cake for the social media age.
Yeah, and that's actually an interesting thing I've noticed as well, is that the elite of South Africa seem to be almost, and maybe this is an incorrect view of it, but they seem to be almost uniquely self-hating, in the sense that they enjoy, to adopt a leftist lens, a position of privilege. and yet also sort of fashionably adopt these anti-colonial attitudes. And for me, if I'm looking, from the outside in, it's like, well, what do you think that means? Right? Do you think you still get to be rich and drink your mojitos?
Right.
Right.
Well,
I mean, it's the definition of a luxury belief.
I'll give you an example of a phenomenon in South Africa that kind of bolsters your point, but it's so ridiculous that I don't think even you would have imagined. So the EFF, the Marxist-Leninists, kill the white people, kill the Boer party. Their main supporter base is not unemployed, poor black South Africans. Their main supporter base, from surveys that have been done, are upper middle class elite South Africans, people that don't have any material wanting, people that live very comfortably, are a significant chunk of their supporter base. So, I mean, that just underlines what you're saying there.
Well, I mean, yeah, and you see the exact same thing in the US, right? Where if you are honestly, if you are a downwardly mobile, sort of upper middle class white progressive, you are a far leftist. I was even speaking to a friend who is, from England, and they were describing the exact same phenomenon, right? Of going to, the most elite institutions in the nation, surrounded by the children of the upper crust, and they're all full on tankies, right? Denying the Holodomor, ready to, sort of resurrect, Lenin's pickled corpse. And I mean, that's sort of a phenomenon worldwide, which, and we've spoken about this before, is why I don't consider myself an accelerationist, right? Because from a certain perspective, South Africa is, as many trends currently present in the rest of the West, just, turned up to 11. Mm-hmm. And that still hasn't broken the progressive mind virus, right? These people are still just the absolute worst. And really,
they just get more creative at insulating themselves. They just move into high security Gulf estates. They send their children to the best private schools as far away from government intervention as possible. And they just they live in the best neighborhoods. They buy the best quality private security. Some of them even have like a security guard at the entrance to their house. They've got the money to pay for that. They've got private security patrolling their homes or their backyards and their neighborhoods. They insulate themselves from the problem. But at the same time, I have to also add, it's so easy for many people to write off leftists as people who see the problem, but they just pretend not to see it. From my experience, a lot of them are genuine, true believers. It's not that they are just like they know exactly that they know that their life's a lie, but they're just playing this act. No, they genuinely believe that their bubble is a representation of the world around them, and that their fringe little view is actually the silent majority view. Now, I'm not using that term in any way like it's been abused in regards to, everyone believes that the silent majority is on their side. I don't even believe in a silent majority, because a silent majority that doesn't have an effect on reality might as well not exist. I believe in energized and organized minorities. But when it comes to many of these leftists, and I've talked to them, I genuinely believe that they are true believers. They come across as true believers. If they knew that their views did not match reality, I don't think anyone would subject themselves to the humiliation willingly that they do on a daily basis, where their views are just exposed constantly as not matching with reality, because they view it as real. I saw this, and we can get into that if you want, the meeting between President of South Africa, Ramaphosa, and Donald Trump. We saw it in the lead up to it, where me, as someone who has not drank the ANC Kool-Aid, who sees the ANC for what it is, could predict a week before that meeting that it was going to be a disaster. I was on a panel discussion on an Afrikaans television channel, where I was sitting on the panel, and this was a week before the South African delegation is going to meet with Donald Trump, the president's delegation. And now we're talking on that panel about what to expect. And I didn't even really say anything too radical. I just said, if the South African delegation goes into that meeting thinking that they can lecture Donald Trump and that Donald Trump cannot provide counter evidence of his own, they're in for a big surprise. And I said, not rhetorically, hypothetically asked the question, what is the South African delegation, the government delegation, going to do if Donald Trump just pulls out evidence, just like pulls out video or photographs or whatever? Now, even I couldn't predict that Donald Trump was going to subject the South African delegation to a cinematic experience. I thought maybe he was going to take out his phone, show a grainy video, and we won't be able to hear anything, but it will be, maybe he'll print out some articles. I thought that's possible. But then we had the dim the lights moment where it was like, I want to show you something. You're locked in here with me, and you don't want to not acknowledge these problems, but I'm going to push it in your face in front of the entire world, and you can't go anywhere. I'm going to force you to watch. And that's what happened. And when I predicted something similar, and I predicted something to a much lesser extent happening, like maybe Donald Trump pulls out some articles and shows a video on his phone, when even that prediction was met with laughter on the panel laughed. They laughed at me as if I was crazy. Like, Donald Trump is a buffoon. He can't do research. What do you mean he's going to provide counter evidence? What evidence? Donald Trump doesn't know how to use Google. What are you talking about? Like, that type of just. And I realize, and also the other implication in their response is that the South African delegation is going to be so prepared. They're going to teach Donald Trump a lesson. They're going to go into the Oval Office and they're going to humiliate him on his home field. And in that moment, I just once again realized that we are sitting in the same cinema, but we're not watching the same film. And then afterwards, we're being asked to give a review of the film, and our reviews are just, we didn't watch the same movie, and we're still not watching the same film. So it's not like they're pretending to be oblivious. They are oblivious to the reality, the real reality of the world out there.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up that delegation, because I was not aware that it was happening. It just had missed me. It had passed me by, and so once I saw it, it was sort of this like, oh, here we go. This is going to be something. And even then, much like you said, I couldn't have imagined that moment. And it was interesting to see how, because if I remember correctly, he showed video, at least in part, of sort of a memorial to those killed in farm murders. Right?
Yeah, a farm murder protest. Yeah.
Yes, a bunch of white crosses, right, representing farmers who had been killed. And I don't have the specific article I'm thinking of in front of me, so just believe me here. But the way that was covered in our media was sort of interesting, because you basically saw apologia, right? It was, that's not happening. Oh, wait, it's happening. Here's why it's actually not a problem, right? Sort of in 3 days, one right after the other. And we shouldn't be surprised by the, I guess, just sort of the pure malice coming from journalists. But like anything else, and there's a statistical law for this, right? But the feeling of reading an article written by a journalist about something that you know a lot about, and all of a sudden you realize this person has no idea what they're talking about. And I don't put myself out as an expert on South Africa. I'm not. But just by being in these waters, by talking to you half a dozen times, by talking to your friends, I realized very quickly, oh, this person has no idea what they're talking about, and it doesn't matter to them. They don't actually care. They're just using this loss of human life cynically as a way to get a dig at someone they don't like. And if pressed, they probably approve of it. And again, right, we've known that Kierkegaard was right about journalists for a long time at this point. But it was this sort of perfect crystallized version, right? That these people are incorrigible, right? You can't really reach them.
We saw a lot of that. I mean, there were so many fascinating responses to that meeting. The one, let's talk about that first. The video that he showed. And he showed many videos, none of them edited, none of them fake. But that one video of the crosses next to the road. So Donald Trump makes a mistake in calling them burial sites. They're not literal burial sites, but each one of them represents a murdered farmer. So if you're looking at it, still it is the same thing. Just because the farmer isn't literally buried, his body isn't below that cross still represents a death. It still represents a person that was killed. So that little detail doesn't take away from the power of that image. It doesn't take away from that protest. It's one of the largest anti-farm murder protests in the history of South Africa. And what really stood out to me was now that video is being played and President Ramaphosa, the president of South Africa, is looking at the video and he has this awful shocked look on his face. He's not really shocked, but he's a terrible actor. He pretends to be shocked. And he looks at this video and he's like, where is this? But he seems completely bewildered. Like, where is this? And the president of the United States, Mr. Donald Trump, known as the journalist in South Africa will tell you, known buffoon and idiot, tells the president of South Africa correctly, this is South Africa. This is your country. So there's only two options that are possible there. On the one side, the president of South Africa is genuinely oblivious, or on the one side, he's genuinely oblivious to the largest farm murder protest, one of the largest farm murder protests in South Africa's history that happened under his presidency while he is the president. If you watch that video to the end, it ends on a banner across the road that says, "How many more must die, Mr. Ramaphosa?" The protest directly addresses the president. So either he's completely oblivious to one of the largest protests, farm murder protests in South Africa's history, as the president of South Africa, and has to be reminded that this happened in his own country by Donald Trump, who I said, as South African journalists will tell you, known idiot buffoon, doesn't know how to use Google, can't write his own name, but knows that this video comes from South Africa correctly. Or the other option is that the president just simply is lying. He doesn't know what's going on here. I do believe that he's lying. I do believe that he's just looking Donald Trump straight in the face and doing a cold-faced lie. I've never seen this footage in my life. The other thing that was also fascinating was how they framed some of the articles that Donald Trump had there. So he had many articles that he printed out that he showed regarding South Africa. And one of the articles had a thumbnail. The thumbnail was from the Congo. So it was showing I think medics in the Congo. And then the media latched onto that. They're like, Donald Trump uses DRC photograph, pretends it's South Africa. And then you actually go look up that article and you realize this is an article that's about instability in Africa that deals with the Congo, but also largely about South Africa. So Donald Trump is right. The article just uses a DRC photograph as the thumbnail. But if you, for example, put a thumbnail on your YouTube channel that has Donald Trump on it, but you also talk about South Africa in that video, were you being dishonest? Were you trying to mislead people? No. So that's the other way that was also that you can just see the dishonesty from the media. Donald Trump has to be framed as he's just lying about South Africa, but it's so easy.
Well, and as someone who's done this at least a little bit, the way that writing an article for the internet works is you are limited by what images you can use, right? If you take your own image, you can use that, but otherwise you have to use something that is fair use. And so that involves going to a service like Shutterstock or Getty or whatever, and you have choices to pick from, right? You have many thousands of images, but nonetheless, it's not like, especially for something new, you can just search what you want and use the exact image you want. You're limited. And so the idea that like, oh, well, this is a representative picture of something kind of close to it, but not literally the event we're talking about, discrediting
but
the article is stupid.
Is about the actual event.
Right. Like if you ever used these, you'll recognize the same images coming up over and over again. So for instance, someone like, RFK, right? The last image of RFK that may be in, your library that you're able to use may have been that moment where he came up on stage and, him and Donald Trump kind of shook hands together. That might, hypothetically speaking. But the idea that if you write about something, RFK is currently doing, or something else at HHS and use that image, someone would say, well, that image is literally exactly what you're talking about, therefore your article is fake, is stupid, right? Anyone who's actually done this understands how this works. And again, right, I understand that you were entirely right. They are lying. They are looking for any way possible to discredit this, but it is so clearly not a good faith criticism that it just sort of, to use a term out of date, it triggers me, right?
It gets worse in regards to how on the one side, there wasn't really a rebuttal from the South African delegation side. It was just post hoc afterwards. They said, oh no, they tried to muddy the waters. But one of the attempts at a rebuttal was just awe-inspiring to some degree. So one of the members of the delegation, well, firstly, they're all sitting there smirking and laughing while Julius Malema's video is being played, where he's chanting about murdering citizens of their country based on their skin color, and they're all just sitting there smirking and laughing. I mean, that's beyond the pale. But then when asked about what's happening to, for example, farmers in their country, one of the South African delegation members stands up and says, you haven't seen nothing yet. You should see what's happening in black communities to grandmothers and babies. And I'm just sitting there, I'm like, that's not a rebuttal. You're just making it worse. You're like, if you think the torture of farmers is bad, you should see how we're torturing the babies and the grandmothers in our communities. I'm like, what are you doing? What are you talking about? Like this is not a rebuttal. This is just digging your hole deeper.
Exactly. And again, it's hard for me not to get frustrated looking at this, because as in every one of these situations we've talked about, the demands from you and your people are fairly reasonable, right? They're like, hey, we would appreciate not being murdered, right? Not exactly a grand ask. And the way that it is treated is just a infuriating mix of stupidity, incompetence, and malice, kind of perfectly synthesized together. And so obviously I've, nothing but best wishes for you and your organization, especially as you go up against this legal fight. But we're coming up on time, Ernst. If people want to find more about you and what you do, what's a good way for them to do that?
Well, they can follow me on X at Conscious Caracal, or they can subscribe to my YouTube channel. On my YouTube channel, I do specifically also interviews, but with guests with a dual purpose. So we talk about topics that I try to make relevant to both South Africa and the wider Western world. So, and they're also not current events. So if you're looking for current events analysis, you're not going to find a lot of that on my channel. It's more topics regarding South Africa that are also relevant to people in the West that will still be relevant in 5 years or 10 years. I try to give my shows some shelf life. They don't get all the views in the short term, and the algorithm doesn't pick them up really, but at the same time they last quasi forever. You'll still be, hopefully, what I aim for is that you can listen to those episodes 20 years from now and they'll still be relevant and interesting. But yeah, that's what I try to aim for on my YouTube channel. And then you can also just follow me on X if you're interested. And if you, the least, or well, what you really can, even small things that you can do that make a real difference is just talking about South Africa and not shying away from the facts, even if they're uncomfortable. I mean, people often mistake and think that, well, what can I do? I can't donate $1 billion to an organization that does good work in South Africa. Well, you don't have to. You can just, if you're ever in a conversation and the topic of South Africa comes up and someone's just blatantly lying or misinformed about the country or about Afrikaners, you can correct them if you actually have the information. Don't just correct them to be contrarian. If you actually know that you're right and they're wrong, tell them that that's not the full story. That's not what's happening in South Africa. There are, to quote Mr. Trump, very bad things happening in South Africa indeed. And those conversations, even on a small scale, really do make a big difference because they pile up and they accumulate to the point where people actually start realizing, well, maybe there are some really bad things happening in South Africa, and maybe there are some good guys down there trying to make a difference as well. And yeah, but also, I always hate to have the topic of South Africa or conversations about South Africa end on a negative note. So I'll make it end on a positive note because I think that's also important. And you as Americans on the outside looking in should know two things. On the one side, there is a very high risk of your country and other Western countries South Africanizing more than they already have. Don't kid yourself and think that I've had people tell me and say that, oh, well, we're already there at South Africa levels of these problems. Like, no, you're dipping your toe into an ocean. But there is a possibility that your country continues to South Africanize. That's the bad news. The good news, however, is that the antidote to South Africanization is already being pioneered and worked on in South Africa. So South Africa is the case study, is the laboratory, is the experiment. So you will not only be able to learn from the successes of those trying to build a future and create order in South Africa and find a appropriate response to government capacity decay and being targeted by the state in this manner. You can also learn from our mistakes. So you'll also be able to see where we made missteps, where we didn't make the right decisions, where we tried something and it failed. So that's the good news that I wanted to end on, is that it's not all doom and gloom. It's not that you should just accept the fact that your country is going to go the route of South Africa, because if it does, there's already people working on the solution for that.
Well, definitely. I mean, I think that's why I'm so interested in what you and your friends do, is that you look like from a certain perspective, things are going badly. But at the same time, there is a capacity to survive and thrive. And again, people love to get very depressed about the state of the West, and in some cases justifiably so. But as you've proven, right, it's not like you sink forever into entropy, right? There's a way to get out. There's a way to build and a way to have something very positive. And it's what I find so impressive about Afriforum, right? It's what I find so impressive about what you guys have been able to do, even in a very hostile environment. I guess both literally and legally. But Ernst, thank you so much for coming on. I always enjoy speaking to you. I'll be sure to include all of those links in the description. You should check them out. Ernst's channel is quite good. I like his podcast a lot. Highly recommend it. But as far as my stuff, The Jay Burden Show is available on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, anywhere you listen to podcasts. And with the episodes early and ad-free, you're going to have to throw me a few bucks, and you can do so on Substack, Subscribestar, Patreon, or Gumroad. I know the ads are annoying, but look, I need to support myself somehow. And I understand if you don't want to be plagued by those. It's $5 a month for 12 to 15 episodes a month, which is not a bad deal, if I do say so myself. Again, Ernst, thank you so much. And everyone at home, keep your head up. Lie can't last forever. Good night.